5 players vanished after a match. 20 years later, a hiker found a clue that changed everything. Sunday mornings in Briar Falls felt like time politely stepped aside. The street lamps stayed on just a little too long. The wind made only enough noise to remind you it was there. And the old field, once the pride of the high school, stood like a forgotten monument to something no one talked about anymore. This morning, Harold Briggs, 72 and steady, unlocked the chain-link gate of the field for the 20th time since they disappeared. He did it every year on the same day, at the same hour, just after dawn, when the town was quietest. The grass was wild now, up to his knees. Painted lines had long faded. The bleachers were skeletal, streaked with rust and bird droppings. But Harold still walked the perimeter, keys jangling, eyes scanning the earth like it might suddenly yield the truth. He stopped at the north end zone, same spot as always, and stood, hat off, head down, 5 names in his mouth, but never spoken aloud, not anymore. 20 years ago, on this field, the Briar Falls varsity Wolves played their last home game of the season. They won. It was a good win. Crowd cheering, jerseys mud-stained, boys jumping over each other like colts in spring. And after the game, the team packed up, climbed onto the bus, and drove back toward the school. Except 5 never made it home. Darren Fox, Miguel Ortega, Ryan Baker, Theo Sim, Julian Marks, 5 boys, all 16 or 17, gone. At first, it was chaos. The school launched an internal review. Parents flooded the police with questions, but there was no blood, no wreckage, no goodbyes. Only a missing persons report filed at 11:48 p.m. by Coach Harris, who claimed they'd walked home separately after the match. No one believed him, but they had no evidence to doubt him either. For the first week, the field became a gathering place. Candlelight vigils, posters, media vans, helicopters, and then silence. By month's end, the national media had moved on. By winter, even local stations stopped airing retrospectives. And by the following spring, the school quietly retired the Wolves' jerseys. Not out of respect, out of unease. Harold kept the gate key. He had been assistant groundskeeper back then. Not a relative, not a coach, just someone who remembered. Someone who knew 5 boys had smiled on this field one day and vanished the next. This year, the breeze carried something sharper, like the air knew something was coming. Harold didn't know it yet, but a hiker 5 miles north of the field, cutting through the ridge that bordered the county, had just tripped over a root, caught himself on a hollowed tree trunk, and found something hidden inside. A metal box, wrapped in plastic. Inside, a single blood-stained jersey, a handwritten map, and a note signed by 5 letters. Just 5, each one matching a missing boy. The hiker's name was Noah Lentz, 29, freelance nature photographer. No ties to Briar Falls. No reason to be hiking that stretch of ridge, except the light he'd heard the sun hit the trees just right around October. That golden fire you only get once a year. He didn't expect the root to catch his boot, didn't expect the fall, and he certainly didn't expect his hand to land on cold metal. It was wedged deep in the hollow of a split oak, long dead, its center blackened from time or lightning. The box itself was rusted but intact, heavy, sealed in 2 layers of plastic wrap, brittle with age. He carried it 2 miles back to his car, unsure of what he had. But the moment he peeled back the wrap and saw the jersey folded inside, its number still faintly visible, 14, he froze. He'd seen a photo of that jersey before, in a documentary, The Wolves That Never Came Back. The sheriff's department confirmed it within hours. The jersey belonged to Julian Marks, wide receiver, class of '03. Blood on the collar, faded, but there. And the note? Written in pencil. The handwriting shook. 5 letters, all caps, one below the other. DFMORB, TSJM. And beneath them, we didn't leave. Sheriff Caroline Miles was barely a deputy when the case first hit. Now, 20 years later, she stared at the evidence with her jaw clenched. The map was hand-drawn, landmarks crude but recognizable to anyone local. A trailhead on Hollow Pass Road, a stream crossing, then a symbol, an X beside what looked like 4 rectangles and 1 dark circle. At the top corner, one more phrase, "He's still there." The next morning, Sheriff Miles gathered a team. Not media, not press, just 3 officers and a local guide. Elaine Frazier, the only one who remembered the backwoods before GPS came in and erased old routes. They hiked quietly. The air was brittle. Pine cracked under boots. The map in Miles's hand flapped once, caught by wind, as if urging her forward. After 3 hours, they reached the stream, then the clearing. And there, exactly as drawn, 4 cabins, and one mound of stone behind them, unnatural and wide, like something had been buried or collapsed. Each cabin was decrepit. No power, no markings. But they weren't random. Cabin 1 had a bed frame and rusted lockers. Cabin 2 had a chalkboard with an old lineup still scrawled across it. Wolves versus Briarview, the last match they ever played. Cabin 3 was different. Its floorboards were newer. Wrong color, wrong cut. Sheriff Miles pried them up slowly. Beneath, a trap door. And in the dirt below it, carved with something sharp, "Help us." They didn't go in, not yet. They marked the site, called in backup, secured the area before dusk. As they walked back, Elaine said only one thing. Those boys were trying to leave a trail. Sheriff Miles nodded, her throat dry. And someone made sure no one ever followed it. Back in town, word spread like fire. Not in headlines yet, but in glances, in whispers outside the post office, in the way old men sat straighter in diners, and women turned off their radios mid-sentence, because something long buried was rising again. And it wasn't just 5 boys anymore. It was all of them. Everyone who remembered where they were when the bus came back light by 5. Everyone who had asked questions and been told, some things don't have answers. Now the forest had spoken, and the town couldn't unhear it. By dawn, the trap door had been opened. A ladder descended into the dark wooden old groaning under the weight of every breath above it. Sheriff Miles led the entry herself. One flashlight in hand. No media, no fanfare. The first few rungs dropped into packed dirt, then stone. A tunnel, carved by hand or desperation, opened out beneath the cabin. The air was still, thick with rot and mold and time. And there, at the end of the passage, was a room, not natural, not kind. The chamber was square, maybe 10 feet by 10. The walls bore claw marks, scratches, scores from metal against stone, names carved again and again, sometimes whole, sometimes just initials. DF, MO, RB, TS, JM. A few were crossed out. Others, shaky, frantic, looked as though they'd been added last. On the far wall, one word repeated in jagged loops. Coach. 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 A corner had been made into a kind of shrine. An old sports trophy. A photograph. 5 matching duffel bags, collapsed with age. One was still zipped. Inside, clothing. Molded, stained, but preserved. And beneath it, an audio recorder. Cassette tape still in place. No label, no title. Just a faint fingerprint smudged into the plastic case. Sheriff Miles brought it back to the station and had it digitized. She didn't play it alone. Elaine Frazier sat beside her. Harold Briggs, too. They'd earned the right to hear first. The tape clicked on with static. Then, a breath. Then a boy's voice. If you're hearing this, we didn't run. The voice was quiet, tired, measured. They told us to stay, said it was part of the program, team building, off-grid. But Coach never called our parents. There's no phone here, no service. Food's running low. I think Ryan's sick. I hear crying in the trees. The voice paused. He locked the door yesterday, told us it was for safety, but I don't think that's true. I think we're not supposed to leave. If anyone finds this, please, tell my mom Julian didn't leave her. Then silence. Then a scrape, something dragging, and a second voice, faint, breathless. They're coming. Click. The tape ended. Elaine pressed her hand to her chest. Harold looked down. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Sheriff Miles whispered, "They knew." The public was told that night. Press conference. Limited details. Just confirmation that evidence recovered suggested the 5 students had been detained in a concealed location by an adult affiliated with the school. But the town knew more than was said. They always had. They'd just been too scared to dig deep enough. That fear started in the year 2000. A parent, Miguel Ortega's mother, filed a complaint against Coach Harris, alleging inappropriate isolation exercises, sleep deprivation training, and mindset conditioning before away games. The complaint disappeared. She moved away 6 months later. Everyone forgot, or said they did. The following day, Miles requested Harris's full personnel file. She hit a wall. A redacted section marked sealed state protection. Why? She pushed further and found a transfer request from 1997. Prior school, Brookpine Academy. Incident report. Disappearance of 2 athletes. Case closed. No bodies recovered. No charges filed. Coach Harris had simply moved on, with glowing letters of recommendation. Elaine looked at the photocopies. Her mouth trembled. How many times did he do this? Miles said nothing. She didn't have an answer. Not yet, but the tunnel was open now, and the light had made it all the way to the bottom. That night, Harold Briggs walked the perimeter of the field again. He carried a lantern, not a flashlight. Let the flame show him the way. When he reached the north end zone, he set it down, took off his cap, and for the first time in 2 decades, he said all 5 names, out loud, to the stars. Coach Harris was hard to find. After retiring from Briar Falls High in 2004, he'd vanished into the folds of the country. No social media, no forwarding address, just a pension check and a trail of dead phone numbers. Sheriff Miles put out a quiet request for assistance from state police. No warrants yet, just a request for eyes. But it was Elaine who found him. She had remembered something from Julian's old yearbook, a photo, not of the team, but of the faculty. In the background, Harris, smiling, hand on Julian's shoulder. He was wearing a championship ring, only it wasn't from Briar Falls. The inscription read, "State Champions, 1991, Brookpine, Brookpine Academy." 2 students had vanished there. No press coverage, no official investigations. Just a closed file, a severance package, and a transfer recommendation. Elaine typed the names into a newspaper archive site. Colin Price, Ethan Devens, both 16, gone after a track meet. Their disappearances had been blamed on runaway behavior, and the school quietly shut down its athletic boarding program that same year. The article quoted the coach at the time. "We all grieve differently. Sometimes kids leave. We just pray they find peace." The quote was attributed to Harlan Ross, not Coach Harris, but the photo matched. Same man, different name. Elaine printed everything and brought it to Miles. The sheriff looked over the records, then pulled the state database. A search for Harlan Ross triggered an alert. It matched an old sealed record from 1985 juvenile conviction for false imprisonment and coercion. Name changed at 18, background scrubbed, eligibility for school employment granted under a clean identity. He'd reinvented himself. Twice, and each time kids had gone missing. The next morning, the phone rang at the sheriff's desk. Caller ID, private line. Miles hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, measured, low. "I know what you found." She sat up straighter. "Who is this?" "I'm not coming in. I won't run. But I won't let you make a circus of it either." Miles gripped the handset tighter. "Where are you?" "I left something at the field." The line clicked dead. She drove out with a deputy and Harold in tow. When they arrived, nothing seemed out of place until Harold noticed something in the center circle. A shovel, stuck in the dirt, and at its base, a plastic bag inside a manila envelope. It contained a page torn from a journal, lined, jagged handwriting. "I tried to help them become more, stronger, sharper. Nobody understood. They wanted to go. I told them it wasn't time. They weren't ready for the world." At the bottom, a single sentence written twice. The game had rules, but the world didn't follow them. They dusted the envelope. Partial prints, enough to start the process. But Miles already knew. This was a confession, of a kind, not a cry for redemption, just a whisper from someone who thought what he did had meaning. That evening, Elaine sat at Julian's desk. She unfolded the letter from the field and placed it beside her son's last known school assignment, a book report, written in pencil, on Lord of the Flies. Sometimes when adults stop watching, things fall apart. She closed her eyes and saw a boy, trapped below a cabin, writing something in the dark, still hoping someone above would be brave enough to look down. The investigation intensified. Reporters caught the scent. News vans parked along Main Street again. 20 years later, the story was back. Only now, it had teeth, and the town didn't know if it wanted justice or just quiet. But quiet was no longer an option, not with bones in the soil, voices on tape, and the one man who could answer for it all leaving breadcrumbs at his own pace. Miles knew it was a game to him. Still was. But now, the field belonged to the kids again, and every secret he left behind was just one more clue toward breaking the silence he'd built around them, one whistle at a time. By the third week, ground-penetrating radar teams began scanning the area surrounding the cabins. What they found stopped everyone cold. Just beyond the mound behind the fourth cabin, the one that looked like collapsed stone, was a rectangular cavity, 6 feet deep, outlined in metal and debris. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't empty. They uncovered 2 full skeletons and partial remains, torn fabric still clinging to bone, one femur broken clean through, another skull bearing an old, healed fracture. Dental records later confirmed Theo Sim, Ryan Baker. The third set couldn't be matched yet, but there were 5 duffel bags, and only 2 confirmed burials. The math hurt to do. Elaine stood behind the caution tape the day they uncovered them. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just stared at the earth like it owed her an answer. "I used to imagine them walking back through that gate," she told Sheriff Miles quietly. "I imagined all 5. Just older, with stories." Miles didn't say anything. There were no words that didn't feel cruel in contrast. The coroner's report noted something else. The bones showed signs of prolonged nutritional deprivation. One had a healed wrist fracture, set incorrectly. Another had fingernail indentations etched into the inside of the duffel bag found nearby. They didn't die quickly, and they didn't die together. Back at the station, Miles stared at the whiteboard covered in red lines and arrows. 3 names still had no fates: Darren Fox, Miguel Ortega, Julian Marks. But the map found in the lockbox, the one Noah Lentz had discovered, had one more marking. A symbol off to the southeast edge of the drawing. A rough sketch of a tower, circled 3 times in black ink. Elaine was the first to recognize it. That's the old fire lookout. It hadn't been used since 1987. Deemed unstable, locked up. But when the sheriff's team hiked out, they found the hatch beneath the base pried open, rusted from the inside. Inside, on the concrete floor, were 3 sleeping bags. 2 long decayed, one rolled and untouched, and scratched into the wooden wall. DF, MO, JM. 11 days. No remains. But someone had made it there, and stayed, for at least a while. Beneath one of the rotted bags, they found another audio tape. Smaller, labeled only, Julian, last night. The audio was fragile, warbled by moisture and time. But the voice, it was his, Julian, clear and afraid. "Coach came back. We thought he was gone, but he came back. Miguel's not waking up. Darren says we have to move. Says the lookout might still have supplies." He takes a breath. "I don't know if we'll make it, but if someone finds this, we tried. We didn't just sit in the dark. We fought." Another breath, quieter now. "Tell my mom I didn't run. I just got stuck." Click. Elaine didn't listen in public. She waited until midnight, turned out the lights, held Daniel's drawing in one hand, Julian's voice in the other. She listened to every word, not as a mother, not as an investigator, but as someone who had waited 20 years for a sound, any sound, from that part of the world. And there it was. Not a scream, not a cry. Just a boy who still hoped someone was listening. Sheriff Miles held a press briefing the next morning. No sensationalism, just the facts. 3 boys confirmed dead, 2 still unaccounted for. An ongoing investigation into the man known as Coach Harris, Harlan Ross. And one chilling truth: they were left. They were isolated. They were silenced. But they left evidence. They left each other. And now, they would never be left behind again. A week later, the call came in from Ashfield County, 2 hours south of Briar Falls. A ranger had found a makeshift grave while inspecting storm damage near an abandoned ranger station. The site was shallow, almost ritualistic. Stones arranged with care, a wooden stake driven at the head, and something nailed to it. A photo. 5 boys, mid-laugh, arms slung over each other in their Wolves jerseys. The words written on the back, in faint pencil: "This is where we lost him." The sheriff's department arrived within the hour. They uncovered skeletal remains wrapped in a canvas tarp. No shoes, no ID. But nearby, in the hollow of a tree, was another plastic bag. Inside, a folded note, and a necklace with a single initial tag: M. Miguel Ortega. They confirmed it with dental records the next day. Cause of death was unclear. No visible trauma. But the positioning suggested he hadn't been buried in haste. Someone had mourned him. Someone had made a grave. Someone had walked away from it. Only one name remained: Darren Fox. Sheriff Miles reread the journal entries, the tapes, the map, the patterns. Darren had been the strongest. The one they all seemed to look to in the recordings. He had organized the final escape. His initials were always first. DF Elaine, too, had begun to notice something. In each clue, each tape, each scribbled message, Darren wasn't just surviving. He was leading. That night, she reopened the envelope of news clippings she had never thrown away. One article, dated August 12, 2004, mentioned an assault at a gas station in Montana. A transient had fought off a would-be mugger, disappeared before police arrived. The store clerk had only managed a brief description: late teens, tall, limping, like he'd been hurt before. He'd given a name before vanishing: Derry. Elaine brought it to Miles. The sheriff ran the report, compared sketch composites, checked timelines, and for the first time, hope pierced the weight of certainty. Because if Darren lived long enough to bury Miguel, he might have made it farther. They released a national alert under his name, not as a suspect, not as a fugitive, but as a witness, a survivor, someone who knew what no one else did, how they escaped, and what happened after. A week passed, then 2. No one came forward, no sightings, no tips. Until, in the quiet of the 3rd week, a call came in to the sheriff's anonymous tip line. The voice was hoarse, older, male. I think I knew one of them, back then. Miles leaned in. Which one? The man paused. Fox. He called himself Darren, but he went by Cal. Didn't talk much. He gave an address. A trailer lot 3 counties over. They didn't storm the place. They didn't bring lights or sirens. Just Sheriff Miles, one plain car, and the quiet knowledge that this could either be a break or another dead end. But when they knocked, someone answered, and behind tired eyes, sun-damaged skin, and a long-healed shoulder scar, was a man in his late 30s, with a lanyard around his neck. Attached to it, a silver tag: DF. He didn't speak at first, just looked at Miles, then past her toward the road. Finally, he asked, "Did they find the others?" The sheriff nodded once. "All but you." He stepped outside, stood barefoot in the gravel, hands shaking, but not from fear, from memory. "They all kept saying someone would come," he whispered. "I wasn't sure anymore." Miles said softly, "We're here now." They brought him in under protective status, not for arrest, but for truth, for closure. And slowly, across 4 long interviews, Darren Fox told them everything. What happened after the game, how they were taken, where they were held, how they escaped, and what they left behind in the dark. Elaine visited him once, sat across from him at a community safe house, hands folded. She didn't ask anything. She just looked at him and said, "Julian wrote that you tried." Darren blinked hard, then looked down. "I didn't try," he said. "I promised." and 20 years later he kept it. The days that followed Darren's return weren't filled with answers. They were filled with silence, processing, paperwork, and pauses, long stretches of time where he simply sat by the window, eyes fixed on something beyond the trees, as if waiting for ghosts to move. Sheriff Miles understood. You don't interrogate trauma. You let it surface like mist rising from a field. He told the story in pieces. First, the beginning. Coach Harris had called it a bonding retreat, said it would test them, make them stronger. No phones, no parents, no distractions. They believed him, because he was coach. He drove them past the turnoff, deep into the foothills, told them there was a camp, that the bus would meet them later. But there was no camp, just the cabins, already prepared, already waiting. He'd done it before, Darren said flatly. He had it all ready. Beds, food, old uniforms, even a schedule. What kind of schedule? Miles had asked. Darren hesitated. Then, discipline, silence, loyalty drills, night watches. He made us believe it was all part of the game, that the real season started out there. Elaine, listening from the hallway, had to sit down, because she remembered how Julian had started getting quieter that year. Not scared, just obedient, too obedient. The first week wasn't horror, it was control. They were fed, monitored, pushed. He never hit us, Darren said. Not then, but he didn't have to. He kept us against each other, told us someone had broken curfew, that someone had talked about leaving, and we'd turn on each other just to be the one he didn't single out. The second week, things changed. Food slowed. One of them, Ryan, got sick. Coach said it was a test. Strength comes through scarcity. No one could leave. The roads were gone. The bus never came. Julian found the trap door first. Accident, Darren said. Looking for firewood. They went down, found the room, and realized what it really was. Not a shelter. A prison. They started planning, not to fight him, but to escape. One at a time, if needed. Darren, Julian, and Miguel made a pact. They would leave together, and they did. Theo and Ryan didn't make it. Ryan died in the night. Fever. Coach called it weakness, and made them bury him behind the cabins. Theo tried to run. He made it 20 yards before the whistle blew. Coach had something in the trees. Darren still didn't know what, but Theo never came back. After that, the fear turned into resolve. We knew, Darren said, it was leave or die. They waited for a storm, and on the night it came, they packed what they had, took the tapes, the map Julian had drawn, Miguel's necklace, Julian's jersey. They split up after a mile. It was Darren's idea. Harder to follow all of us. He never saw Miguel again. He heard the crash the next morning, and the screaming, then silence. He kept walking, made it to the lookout, found old supplies, stayed until his legs healed enough to run, then vanished. Name after name, state after state, never using his real one, never staying long. He assumed the rest hadn't made it, until he heard the podcast, until he saw Elaine's name, until he saw the red tree she'd drawn on a flyer, with 5 initials at the bottom. They were still looking, he whispered. And if they were looking, he trailed off, then nodded to himself. Then I had to come back. Elaine stepped in then, held out Julian's drawing, the one she'd kept. He reached for it with both hands, studied the stick figures, the crooked roof, the word home. I remember when he drew this, Darren said, the night before the last game. He touched the word gently. He said one day, someone would find it. Elaine blinked fast, and for the first time in years, her voice cracked with something more than grief. Someone did. Outside, the wind had shifted, not stormy, just restless, like the forest was exhaling, because after 2 decades, the truth wasn't underground anymore. It had stood up, spoken, and survived. The media frenzy was inevitable. By the end of the week, every news outlet, from local affiliates to national primetime, had descended on Briar Falls. The town, once a forgotten speck in the foothills, was now a symbol of survival, of silence, of what happens when people look away for too long. But Darren didn't speak to the press. He made only one statement, written by hand, released through Sheriff Miles' office. We were just kids. We trusted someone we shouldn't have. Some of us died, some of us escaped, and one of us never stopped trying to get the truth home. This isn't a story about horror. It's a story about being heard. Let that be the last word. Coach Harlan Ross, aka Coach Harris, was arrested 2 days later in a diner outside Flagstaff. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He simply put down his coffee, looked at the badge, and stood. In the back of the cruiser, he stared out the window like he was still calculating something, still strategizing. He was extradited under high security, charged with multiple counts: felony abduction, unlawful imprisonment, criminal negligence leading to death, fraudulent employment under false identity, tampering with a missing persons investigation. Bail was denied. He said nothing in court, just sat there in a gray jumpsuit, older now, smaller somehow. But his silence didn't protect him anymore. Elaine attended the arraignment. She sat in the third row. She didn't look at him. She looked only at the evidence board, the photographs of Julian and the others, their smiling, hopeful faces suspended in time. As she left, a reporter called out, "Do you feel like you got justice?" She paused, then answered simply, "No, but I finally got the truth." A memorial was planned for the field, not a vigil, a return. The families of the 5 boys, some still in town, some flown back from other states, gathered under a gray sky. Darren stood off to the side, not hidden, just distant, like a piece of himself would always be 10 miles away, in a tunnel beneath the cabin, watching 5 boys draw their escape on the wall. Elaine approached him quietly. He was looking out toward the end zone. "Julian used to say the north end was cursed," Darren said. Elaine managed a faint smile. He always had a flair for drama. He wasn't wrong. They stood together a while. Then Darren reached into his coat pocket. "I kept this." He handed her a folded piece of paper, a page torn from Julian's notebook. It was a second drawing, same crooked house, same stick figures. But this time, one extra figure stood in the background, arms outstretched. Over the door, a word was written in red crayon. "Almost." Elaine ran her finger over it. "He never gave up," Darren said. "Even when he knew. Even when we knew we wouldn't all make it." She nodded, then folded the paper gently. "He's home now." That evening, Elaine returned to the red maple behind her house, the one that had once been planted in his memory. She tied 2 ribbons to the lowest branch, one blue for Julian and one black for the others. Then, for the first time in 20 years, she left the porch light off, not because she stopped waiting, but because the waiting was over. Across the country, calls came in to tip lines, other coaches, other schools, other disappearances that never got headlines. The Below Project extended their scope. What began as a local search had become a national reckoning. Sheriff Miles was asked to consult. Elaine was invited to speak at a congressional hearing. Darren declined all offers, but he mailed one thing to the task force: an annotated copy of the map Julian had drawn, with one phrase written beside it: "There are more." Because sometimes surviving isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the first clue in someone else's map. Darren Fox lived quietly after that. He was offered therapy, relocation, even a book deal. He declined all of it. He took a job working night shifts at a veterans clinic 2 towns over. Something about the silence there, the patience required to sit beside someone who couldn't speak, he understood that now. He didn't need headlines. He needed stillness and the freedom to remember on his own terms. But the world didn't stop remembering. Elaine's congressional testimony sparked immediate review of hiring protocols in schools across all 50 states. More than a dozen institutions came forward, uncovering sealed files, closed investigations, and most damning patterns. Coach Harris had not been the only one, but he had been the most methodical, the one who turned team building into a script for control. Elaine began organizing survivor support groups, not just for Briar Falls, for anyone who had almost vanished. One of her emails read, "We are the witnesses now, not of tragedy, but of return. The world tried to erase our children, but we told it, not this time, not anymore." Sheriff Miles remained in office, but she began mentoring younger deputies, preparing to pass the torch. She kept a photo of the 5 boys on her desk, not to mourn, but to remind herself why she never stopped digging. "I owe them that," she once told Elaine. "We all do." The high school reopened the field the following spring. New grass, new scoreboard, but the same goalposts. They didn't paint over the past, they honored it. At midfield, a bronze plaque was set into the ground. To the 5 who fought to be found: Julian Marks, Miguel Ortega, Ryan Baker, Theo Sim, Darren Fox. Your footsteps echo longer than any whistle. Darren didn't attend the ceremony, but he sent a letter, read aloud by Elaine. I don't remember the last thing I said to them. I remember the fear, the cold, but I also remember their hands, their faces, the way they looked at me like I had a map in my chest. I didn't, but they followed me anyway, and that's what made it home. At the back of the crowd, a boy stood quietly, 15, hands in pockets, a backpack slung low. Elaine noticed him lingering long after the speeches ended. She approached gently. You okay? He nodded, then asked, Were you Julian's mom? I am, she said. He looked down at the plaque, then back at her. My brother knew him. Said he was the only one who passed the ball to everyone, no matter how bad they were. Elaine laughed softly. That sounds like him. The boy smiled, then pulled something from his pocket, a keychain, with 5 initials carved in wood. DFMORBTSJM. I made this, he said, just to remember. Elaine's eyes filled. She took it gently, studied it, then handed it back. Then you carry it, she said, because remembering is how we bring them forward. That night, the field lights glowed brighter than they ever had, and in the sky above Briar Falls, the clouds finally broke, just enough to let the stars peer down, watching, shining, as if 5 voices were still calling each other home. The wind changed in Briar Falls that summer, not violently, but like a curtain being drawn back to let the world breathe again. For 2 decades, the town had carried a silence thick as mud, heavy, unspoken, settling in the cracks of sidewalks, the pauses in conversation, the way people avoided looking too long at the empty corners of the football field. But now, for the first time in years, people talked. Openly. Gently. Truth had softened the edge of the wound. Elaine started receiving letters from across the country. Parents, coaches, even former students from schools with missing classmates. Some sent apologies for not believing the rumors. Others sent sketches, maps, crayon drawings, notes their siblings left behind, now finally taken seriously. Each one, a tiny flame passed from one hand to the next. She created an archive, not online. A physical room, quiet, windowless, temperature-controlled inside the Briar Falls Historical Center, the below room. On its walls, timelines. Under glass, Julian's drawings, Miguel's necklace, Darren's annotated map. In the center, 5 empty jerseys, backlit softly, casting long shadows across the floor. A folded letter sat beneath each, written by someone who had known them. Elaine had written 3. Darren had written the other 2. One afternoon, Darren visited the room alone. He didn't linger by his own jersey. He went to Julian's, stood for a long time, then pulled a scrap of paper from his wallet. He placed it under the glass. On it, a play they'd drawn together during a study hall. Not for a real game, just one they'd made up. Wide Right Loop, Ghost Run, Julian had named it. The Breakout. Outside, the sky dimmed. Evening crept in. Darren sat on the museum steps, staring into the dark. He wasn't afraid of it anymore. He had lived in darker places. But now he knew something he hadn't believed in back then. That people could come back, even if not in body, then in memory, in voice, in the proof they left behind. Sheriff Miles retired that fall. Her badge was passed to Deputy Wren, a quiet man who'd joined the force the year after the disappearance. He'd told Miles once, I joined because I thought if I became a cop, I'd find them. Now, he'd helped finish that mission. At her retirement party, Miles stood in front of the community she'd served and said, Justice isn't a verdict, it's a light. And the thing about light, once it gets into a place, it's hard to get it out again. Elaine stood next. She didn't speak about Julian this time. She spoke about the other 4, about how every one of them had written something, left something, and how Darren had carried those voices through the dark, even when he had no one to speak them to. She closed her remarks with a whisper. They lived. They mattered. And now, they echo. Later, she and Darren walked together down the old dirt trail behind the school. Leaves crunched beneath their feet. Autumn had returned, like it always did. They stopped by the edge of the woods where the tree line thickened. Darren looked ahead. I used to dream about running, he said. Elaine looked up at him. And now? He paused, then smiled just slightly. Now I dream about staying. Behind them, the school bell rang. Faint, distant, but clear. Not a warning, not a call to arms. Just a sound that said, "You're safe. You can come inside now." Darren didn't speak at schools or conferences, but when a local counselor invited him to a youth mentorship meeting, he said yes, not because he had answers, but because there was a boy there, quiet, withdrawn, with the same watchful eyes Darren had worn for years. They played chess in silence the first week. The second week, Darren told him how to pitch a tent without instructions. The third week, the boy asked, "Did you really survive in the woods?" Darren just nodded, then added, "But I didn't do it alone." That became his lesson. Not strength, not toughness, but connection. A quiet insistence that someone, somewhere, is always worth holding on to, even when everything else collapses. Elaine continued to receive envelopes. One arrived from Nevada. It contained only a photo. 5 teenagers at a summer camp, arms linked. One of them had been listed missing in 1993. The caption on the back, "We were almost next." Another letter came from Florida. A coach confessed to being offered money in 1997 to redirect 5 players from an out-of-state trip. He refused, but never reported it. He wrote, "I see their faces every time I step onto the field. I won't look away again." Julian's birthday came in late October. Elaine walked the edge of the football field that morning. The grass had grown tall again near the north end zone, like it was still guarding something. She knelt there, not to cry, but to place something new, a small stone, etched by hand. It read, "You were more than a mystery. You were a message, and we heard you." Inside the high school, a new elective had been added to the curriculum, civic memory and cold cases. It wasn't a true crime class. It was a listening class. Students studied the art of documenting voices, gathering accounts, understanding silence as a form of information. They didn't learn to solve. They learned to see. At the first session, each student was handed a card. On it, 5 names. No details, just names. And one question. What would you want remembered about you if you couldn't speak anymore? Darren sat in the back of the room that day, a guest observer. He didn't speak, but he watched as kids, barely older than he'd been, wrote things like, that I was funny, that I tried, that I loved my dog, that I didn't give up. He blinked slowly, because that was the point, wasn't it? To leave behind not just a body, but a truth. That evening, Elaine found a package on her porch. No return address. Inside, a cassette, labeled Julian 2, Final. She borrowed an old tape deck from the museum, pressed play, the static cleared, and then a voice. "If anyone ever hears this, it means we made it far enough. Far enough to be found. Don't forget us. Don't forget anyone. That's all." A pause, then quietly, "Love you, Mom." Elaine sat still, not crying, just breathing. Long, slow, grateful. Because 20 years later, her son had come home, not in form, but in voice. And in the echo of it, she could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, not lost, not alone, but walking home again, together. The days after the final tape felt different, not louder, not busier, but quieter in a new way. Elaine didn't rush to share the tape with the press or the task force. She didn't burn copies or upload it online. Instead, she placed it on the shelf above her desk, next to Julian's notebook, the red crayon stub he used to carry, and the corner of his jersey that had survived the forest. The world already had his voice. This was hers to hold. She did, however, write a letter, addressed to the next mother waiting. It read, "I can't tell you it gets easier. I can't tell you it gets lighter, but I can tell you this. They don't disappear. Not when you remember them with your whole body. Not when you speak their name into a world that tries to forget it. Keep speaking. Keep scratching at the dark. Keep a light on. The quiet might answer you back. Mine did." Sheriff Miles, now retired, received a final file from federal agents working the national probe. It contained archived driver logs from the early 2000s. One log showed a canceled van trip in 2001 from a high school 2 counties over. The driver who filed the cancellation? Harlan Ross. The reason given? Change in roster. Team no longer eligible. Miles closed the file slowly. He had tried again, but something stopped him. A cancellation, a pause, or maybe a decision. The why would never be known. But the could-have-beens chilled her and made the known ones even more sacred. The Briar Falls Museum received an anonymous donation that same week. A spiral-bound notebook, faded and warped from age. On the cover, a name written over and over in black marker. Darren Fox. Inside, journal entries. Not confessions. Instructions, maps, routines, observations about people, safety, code words, written like a boy trying to make sure someone else wouldn't suffer what he had. At the bottom of one page, if you get out, leave the door open. The museum made a copy of the notebook and placed it in the below room, underneath a sign that read, "How they endured." Not how they died, not how they were taken, but how they lasted. Fall settled in, and with it, the season opener for Briar Falls High. The Wolves were back. New uniforms, new coach, same name. At halftime, a moment of silence stretched across the field, followed by a reading of 5 names, one by one, followed by 5 jersey numbers lifted skyward. Br 11, Br 24, 7, Br 5, Br 14, then no speech. Just the band playing You'll Never Walk Alone, and the crowd rising, not in applause, but in remembrance. Darren stood behind the fence, far from the bleachers. He didn't go inside, just watched from a distance. When the music stopped, he turned and began to walk away. But a boy maybe 10 years old broke from his dad, ran to the fence and called out, "Hey!" Darren paused. The boy held up his hand. "I saw your name," he said. "In the museum." Darren said nothing. The boy smiled. "You made it out." Darren nodded, then turned, walked back into the trees. Because sometimes, the loudest closure comes from the quietest witness, and Darren had seen enough silence to know. This time, it was saying thank you. Elaine no longer dreamed in static. For years, her sleep had been riddled with murky images, empty seats on the school bus, muddy cleats abandoned in locker rooms, the sound of a whistle that never stopped blowing. But now, when her eyes closed, she saw Julian sitting under a tree, scribbling in his notebook, his lips moving softly as if rehearsing what he would say if she ever found him again. She began to write again, not emails or interviews, letters, one for each of the boys. To Theo, "You were quiet, but they followed you. That means something." To Miguel, "Your mother always knew you hadn't run. She never doubted you." To Ryan, "I wish the fever hadn't taken you, but even when your body failed, your name survived." To Darren, "You came back, and that saved everything." And to Julian, "You taught me how to listen without noise. You left me with silence that spoke louder than anything else ever could." She placed the letters in the archive, a drawer labeled, "For when they visit." Because sometimes memory wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to prepare for the impossible. Sometimes love means leaving a trail in case the ones who left ever found their way back, even if only in spirit. Elsewhere, Darren was building something. Not much. Just a wooden structure in the forest behind his new home. A single-room cabin. No locks, no furniture. Just a window and a door. He carved names into the inside wall, not as a shrine, but as a ledger, an accounting. Every boy, every place, every moment someone said they mattered. Above the names, one phrase: "We did not vanish." He mailed one photo of the wall to Elaine. No message, no signature, but she knew. She placed it in a new folder, labeled, "What They Left Behind." Sheriff Wren, now a year into his role, closed the last administrative file on the Briar Falls case. It didn't solve every mystery. It never would. But it was complete. He stood before the evidence room, box after box, now marked archived instead of active. He ran his hand along the spines, then whispered, "Rest now," and turned off the lights. The state of Colorado officially added the Briar Falls 5 to its annual Remembrance Day for victims of institutional negligence. Their names were etched into a granite monument in the state capitol. Elaine attended the ceremony. She didn't bring flowers. She brought Julian's favorite pen. She left it in the grass. Let the rain wash it into the soil. And somewhere in another city, a teenage girl sat in her bedroom drawing a red tree on notebook paper. She'd seen it in a news clip. Didn't know why it spoke to her, but she felt something when she looked at it. She drew 5 initials beneath it. Didn't even know their names. She just felt them. And in that quiet knowing, they lived again. Because memory isn't just for those who knew them. It's for those who feel them now. In silence. In drawings. In porch lights left burning just a little longer than usual. The first snow fell in early November. Thin, feathery flakes that melted on contact but still whispered over rooftops and forest trails. Elaine stood at her window, tea cooling in her hand, watching the season turn like a page she'd already read too many times. Except this time, the ending wasn't dread. It was peace. A fragile kind. Earned, not granted. Down at the field, the maintenance team had covered the plaque with a sheet of plexiglass to protect it from winter frost. No one claimed it had laid 5 white gloves beside it. Youth-sized, lined up neatly on the grass. The gesture was simple, but powerful. Elaine walked the field once more that week. She paused in the same place Harold used to stand. Only now he was gone. His health had faded the summer prior. His name etched now, too, on the side of the below room's wall, under the words, "Caretaker of Memory." She missed him, missed his silent loyalty, missed how he never claimed to know the boys, just insisted they deserved to be remembered. Inside the museum, the guest book had filled its pages. Visitors came from across the country now, some seeking closure, some out of curiosity, some just wanting to stand near something true. One entry read, "I never met them, but I feel like I know them. I think that's what legacy means." Another simply said, "Thank you for not giving up." Darren visited the wall again. This time he brought a hammer and a small wooden plank. He nailed it beside the others, crooked but firm. On it, a single word. Enough. Not as in giving up, but as in finally. Enough silence. Enough forgetting. Enough not being seen. Elaine later asked him what he meant by it. He replied with a shrug, then said quietly, "They waited long enough. Now they're heard." The state awarded posthumous diplomas to all 5 boys, framed and delivered to their families. Elaine placed Julian's beside the drawing he left her. At the bottom of the diploma, beneath the gold seal, it read, "In honor of perseverance, courage, and the pursuit of truth." She spoke at a final gathering that winter, smaller, just families, friends, and a few faces from the past. She read a letter, not Julian's, Darren's, one he'd written but never sent. It read, "We thought we were the story, but we were just the beginning. The real story is who listened, who kept walking, who remembered." So if you're reading this and you feel small, remember, echoes don't stop at the door. They go through. When Elaine finished, no one applauded. They just stood, silent, together. The first winter storm rolled in that night. Elaine returned home, lit her candle, and placed it beside the photo of Julian smiling with grass in his hair and dirt on his jersey. She whispered, "You're not missing anymore." Because in Briar Falls, they no longer called it the disappearance. They called it the return, not of boys and flesh and bone, but of truth, of voice, of a story that demanded the world listen and remember. Spring returned slowly to Briar Falls. The frost retreated like a quiet apology, giving way to soft shoots of green along fence lines and muddy trails. The cabins, those weathered monuments in the foothills, had been cordoned off, designated as a historical site under restricted access. Not a tourist trap, not a horror relic, a place of testimony and healing. Elaine visited once more before the official closing. She walked alone into cabin 3, where the floorboards still bore the faint outline of the trapdoor. She didn't go below. She didn't need to. She stood in the doorway, eyes on the space where 5 boys had waited, fought, survived. She whispered each of their names, and in doing so felt the echo come back not in sound, but in warmth that settled quietly in her chest. Julian, Miguel, Ryan, Theo, Darren. At the base of the final cabin, a team had unearthed something unexpected during a final survey. A tin box, wedged between 2 foundation stones, wrapped in layers of cloth and tar. Inside, a final page, written in pencil, half faded. It read, "If you find this, it means someone kept walking. It means someone didn't stop. It means we weren't lost for nothing." No names, just a single drawing, 5 stick figures standing beneath a red tree, and 1 stick figure holding a light. They placed the page in the below room, encased in glass, lit gently from above, and beneath it, carved in bronze. They waited for the world to remember, and the world did. The museum remained free to enter. No admission fee, no velvet ropes, just a guest book at the entrance with 1 question written in thick black ink. Who are you remembering today? One morning, a girl sat in front of the wall of names. She was 11, hair in 2 braids. No one knew her. She simply came in, sat cross-legged, and stared at the 5 jerseys for nearly an hour. Before she left, she wrote in the guest book, "I didn't know them, but I want to be like them. Brave." Darren continued his quiet work in the woods. The cabin he built was now surrounded by trees he planted himself. He never told anyone what he called the place. But one day, Elaine received a photograph in the mail. No return address, just the cabin, bathed in early morning fog, and carved above the door, Echo House. She framed it, hung it above her desk, and below it, she taped the last line Julian ever wrote to her, in a birthday card she'd nearly thrown away years ago. "Don't forget, Mom, I'm always writing, even when it's dark." Now the darkness didn't scare her anymore, because she understood. Some stories begin in silence. Some disappear for a while. Some get buried under trees in time. But truth has a way of finding air, of floating back up, even through stone, of being heard finally, fully, because someone refused to stop looking, and someone else refused to stay hidden. So if you hear footsteps behind you one day, soft, steady, familiar, don't be afraid. It might just be the echo of someone finally walking home. Some truths don't shout. They whisper, in rusted lockboxes, in red trees scratched onto notebook pages, in the flicker of a flashlight left behind on a dirt path no one dared follow until someone did. What happened in Briar Falls was never just a mystery to solve. It was a voice that refused to be erased. 5 boys vanished after a game, but what they left behind, clues, symbols, names, recordings, was not the residue of victims. It was the architecture of resistance, a map out of darkness, drawn in pieces by hands that knew no one was coming, and still hoped someone might. They weren't forgotten. They were waiting. And when the world finally listened through mothers who wouldn't stop searching, through survivors who spoke with shaking hands, through sheriffs who kept the light on, what emerged was more than justice. It was presence, a reminder that memory, when kept with care, can bring the lost home. Not always in body, but in story, in truth, in legacy. So maybe that's what survival really is. Not just living through something, but making sure others don't live through it again. And maybe the most heroic thing we can do isn't to uncover a secret, but to carry it, protect it, speak it gently and often, like a name, like a prayer, like 5 voices saying together, "We were here," and someone listened. And that is how the story ends, not with silence, but with a return.